You to R&B. Thanks, Storm and Marcos and Paul for generously sharing. So I'm back on stage, but I'm actually doing something slightly different. I'd like to share a story myself from the company that I work with. I work with a company called Schneider Electric, and it's a global company. It was originally a French company. It's about 100 years old, but it's been global for a while. I joined Schneider in December 2015. And one of the things that really struck me when I joined Schneider, compared to my previous sort of global corporate experience, was the amount of engagement that came from the global leadership team. I'd never experienced it before. I mean, this guy, the CEO, his name is Jean-Pascal Tricoire. He's kind of always on social media. He's on Twitter, he's on LinkedIn, but he's also internal. So he travels often. We're a global company. And every month, there's a coffee session with JPT, and you'll see him having an interview with a staff member talking about what's happening in that part of the world. And I remember when I joined, it was probably 3 months later, and I said to a colleague of mine, this is amazing. I mean, this is, I've never seen this before. And she said, she's a cynic. So she said, let's talk 6 months from now, and let's see if you're still interested in it. And 6 months later, I was even more interested, because I noticed some things that were sort of really strong benefits from that. And I'd like to share 2 stories. About Schneider. So first, to talk about Schneider. Schneider is, as I say, a global company, and we're the global leaders in energy automation and energy management. So we're not Schindler, the lift company. We're Schneider. I want to share 2 stories that have resonated very strongly with me, and why I'm proud of the company as a brand, and their people stories. So the first is around talent and leadership. When I joined Schneider, and I think I was mentioning this to someone earlier, one of the things that really sort of disturbed me was the difference between who we were from a product and quality and technology perspective, and who we were from an employee experience perspective. So we win awards, we have really great products, we're cutting edge, but the employee experience just fell a little short of that, in my view. More so in the job that I do, and one of the great advantages of my job is I get to work across Middle East and Africa. Consistently, what I saw was actually our leadership was not where it needed to be. We had people who were great sales guys and who were concerned about every 90 days delivering on value. But when it came to how they managed people, whether they were conscious in themselves, I mean, I've come to use this analogy over time. I met guys who were kittens who thought they were lions, in terms of how they led. And unfortunately, I also met lions who thought they were kittens, who just had so much charisma, so much power, so much influence, but were completely unaware of it, and therefore were kind of ineffective in their use of it. The first thing that was clear to me was that there was some consistency over Middle East and Africa. And it's so diverse. I've heard it said, I didn't hear him say it directly, I've heard it said that one of our very senior HR people said, if you take every kind of human complexity possible and you mix it together and call it a name, it's Middle East and Africa. So whether it's racial diversity, political diversity, religious diversity, economic diversity, but also economic complexity, everything you can think of is in Middle East and Africa. So it's always a very interesting test case. It's so diverse, it's so exciting, and yet there was this commonality that the quality of our leadership was just not where it needed to be. And so the story I'd like to share is my utter amazement. As I say, I've worked in corporates before, but my utter amazement at the commitment, the time, the turnaround time, and just the scale at which things have been done. So again, JPT as the leader, we have these campaigns like all companies do. And the big thing about Schneider is life is on. So we want to switch life on for people around us through our products, but also through who we are as a company. And I mean, I'm sure that there was a conversation had about the difference between who we want to be, who we think we are, and who we are. And what I've seen in the last 2.5 years since I've joined has been an amazing amount of introspection that quickly moves into action. You know, I'm used to corporates where we introspect and then we come with a plan and then we do the plan and then we change the plan. But the speed to action has been amazing. So let me give concrete examples. When we noticed this leadership gap, the question was, so what were we going to do about it? First of all, what were we going to do with this issue of lack of self-awareness, where our leaders don't even know who they are? And very quickly, we decided that we were going to do what we've come to call a Middle Eastern Africa in the mirror. You know you may know the Michael Jackson song, Man in the Mirror. So if we're going to do something about this, we have to talk to ourselves, right? So the decision was taken, again, to do something at scale. So we have a zone president, and we have those reporting so the zone president and the 2 layers after him. We took a decision that we were going to run a mass assessment exercise, and we were going to use specific tools that were used globally, and we've been running through that this year. And what I see, first of all, the resistance. Why do we need to do this? This is distracting us from business. We've done this kind of thing in the past. It's a waste of time. And the amazing sort of just driving through, using engagement, talking about linking it to business, it has been phenomenal. So that's the first thing that I want to talk about. It's happening at a Middle Eastern Africa, but it's also happening globally. The same issue that we see in Middle Eastern Africa has been seen globally. And what the decision was taken was that, okay, we're going to do some education, and we're going to roll out globally a training program. But nobody wants to sit in a training room for 2 days, right? So what was done is we partnered with a company that does almost soundbite training. So it's 2 hours, and every single manager globally, I mean, this is a company of 180,000 people. In 1 year, every single manager globally had to go through a program of giving great feedback and performance coaching, because we realized that these 2 issues were issues that let me give you a practical example. Imagine sitting as an HR person and having a conversation with a manager at the end of the year, and he says his person was a high performer. Okay, so what were the goals and how did they high perform? No, he had to meet customers. He had to meet 5 customers, and he met the 5 customers, and so he high performed. This is really where we were starting from, that really basic level of, I don't have the courage to have a conversation with you. I don't want to offend you. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. And so moving from that very low base to where we are now, where we're able to challenge and have conversations. Again, what I'm talking about is just the scale and the speed of what I've seen and the engagement. In that space. The second story is about early careers. The same thing. We have a resistance where if you don't have 10 years of experience in energy management and automation, nobody wants to hire you in the industry. And so we keep just hiring and doing a revolving door thing with our competitors. And we had to stop and say, how are we going to do this differently? And so we called people to think with us. We called Universum because they're great at what they do. And so one of the things that we've done is we have now identified a pyramid where we say, if we want to get this level of change at the top of our organization, what do we need to do today? And what we've done is just having conversations with line managers around what kind of company do you want to be? What is your goal for the future? And reorienting the sort of conversation from today and 90 days to a 5-year picture has been a really strong journey. So those are the things that I wanted to talk about on the talent side, and I hope I'm doing this justice. And then I want to talk about diversity and inclusion, because this is really where the passion is. I recall the leadership saying something 1.5 years ago about, we're not who we want to be, but we have the courage to say that, and we have the courage to do something differently. And again, it's one of those things where you say, okay, yeah, this is just engagement, but what does it mean? I tell you what it has meant. In the last 1.5 years, the put your money where your mouth is that I've seen is amazing, and I'd like to share some of what has happened. So I'd like to talk about speed, structure, empathy, and courage. Because as Schneider, we said, we want to be the best company. We are going to be ambitious and courageous about wanting to be the best company when it comes to creating a space where people feel like they belong. And so the first thing that I noticed started to shift was the language. Suddenly I heard people talking about psychological safety. Like, who talks about psychological safety in the workplace? But this is now the language, is we want to create a workplace where people feel they can be their best selves. So what did Schneider do? We had a gender board. We had a global gender board, and it was basically high potential women from all over the world that would be on this board. The first thing they did was change it from a gender board to a diversity and inclusion board. And in doing that, making some of the global executives members of that board. So again, direct engagement and accountability. The next thing that Schneider, that we did was, the leadership has this strategy which nobody understood initially. So we don't have a global head office. You know how everybody has a global head office? We don't. We have 5 global head offices, and we will have 6 or 7 soon. And the idea around this, I was sitting and listening to a head of talent talk about it. And the idea is that every young person who joins Schneider, whether you join in Morocco, Boston, or Singapore, should be able to see close enough to you an example of global leadership that makes you aspire to want to be that person. And so what we've done is, instead of headquartering in France, which we did traditionally, we've spread our headquarters and we've spread the executive team. So our global CEO sits in Hong Kong with the global head of HR. We have some people sitting in Singapore. We have people sitting in London, in Dubai. Every continent, literally. Every continent where we operate has global leaders, and we have what we call a global hub. So instead of having a head office, we have global hubs. And why is this important? It's important because my young early career in Turkey can feel bolder about aspiring to a job in Dubai than they would maybe in France or wherever else. My young person in Kenya can see 2 steps or 3 steps away from an executive position in Dubai. And it's the same whether you're in Singapore, Boston, or France. And so this is the second thing that was done, was to create this hub approach where everywhere we operate, every continent, if you like, there's a leader there. And then things just started to snowball. Schneider has always signed up for He for She. I don't know, how many of you know about He for She? It's a UN initiative, similar, by the way, to Athena, where we say men and women matter, and men and women need to come together for change. But most importantly, because, like Liesel was saying earlier, organizations were created mostly for men. We need men to partner with women to change the way organizations are. So we'd always done that. But what has amazed me, and the story that I'd like to really share, is I was sitting we were having a global diversity conference, I think sometime in April or March. And I was sitting and I was amazed at the speed and what had happened between when I put up my hand to say, oh, I want to be part of this, and what I was seeing. In 18 months, what Schneider has done is we sent out globally to every organization saying, within the company, tell us what you're doing on family leave. Tell us what you're doing around flexible working, and tell us what you're doing in the diversity space. So do you have any of these, these diversity affinity groups, etc.? All that information came, and then the next thing was the aspiration that says, this is who we want to be. Who is the best in the market? So we looked at what Google is doing, what Microsoft is doing, and what people are really doing, especially in the family leave space, is amazing. So there's, for example, some companies that give 1 year maternity leave or parental leave, if you like. And so we put our hands up and we said, we want to be at that best, and what does that best mean for us? And from having some countries, including, interestingly, the US, where people only get 4 or 8 weeks, or 6 to 8 weeks of maternity leave, we put in a baseline. So at a base, global, and what the story that I'm sharing is the story of global scaling, right? So standing up and saying, from the middle of July last year, we gave each company, each organization within Schneider till the end of the year to implement this. So again, it's about giving people time to adjust, but saying this is the road and we're going there. So the global family leave policy has come into play. It's been about a year now. What changed? The first thing that changed is globally, every male gets 2 weeks of paternity leave if he's not the primary caregiver globally. The second thing is that we've changed the idea of maternity leave to talk about parental leave, because one of the things that we recognize is that talking about maternity leave excludes people. It excludes same-sex couples, who sometimes there's no mother, so to speak, in terms of what we understand as maternity leave. It excludes people sometimes who don't are pregnant and carry the children, etc. So we've expanded it to this parental leave policy where the primary caregiver, whoever that is, and it's determined by the family, gets a minimum of 2 months, and if it's more in your country, then it's more. But at least globally, we can say that everybody gets 2 months. The secondary caregiver gets 2 weeks. So usually it's the father, so we would say paternity leave is 2 weeks. Then we had an interesting backlash in Middle Eastern Africa saying, are you guys aware that we have, for religious reasons or cultural reasons, people with multiple wives and people who are having multiple children at a time? This is not a joke, I kid you. I remember colleagues from Egypt saying, we're not implementing this. We're not doing this. This is not possible. So I have my technician, and he has 3 wives, and and they each have 3 children. He's never going to work because so these are the education things we actually had to go back and say, we're implementing this, and if we need to deal with that guy on a one-on-one basis and have a conversation, we will. So sometimes the resistance comes from really strange places. The other thing that was implemented was support for people who need who need to take care of family. So 2 weeks also for family care and responsibility, which in South Africa we're like, yeah, we already have 10 days, so, you know. But globally, what was done is we looked across the world and say, what was the best practice globally? And so, for example, South Africa with our 10 days of, we have 10 days of family responsibility leave. So they took that as an example to say, okay, globally everybody gets 2 weeks. So this is the other thing that I'm really excited about, the family care policy. Then we have the global flexible working policy. And the global flexible working is really about saying, if we're moving digital and we're going to be a digital company, how are we making sure that we are providing the right structure from a digital tools perspective to make sure people can take those things? And so this is ongoing work, but it's really to say, do the tools fit the ambition? And where the tools don't fit the ambition, what are you going to do about it? And then we signed the Free and Equal Charter. The UN has the Free and Equal Charter, and it's really about recognizing the rights of LGBTI, which is not a big deal until you're in Middle Eastern Africa. So every year we have an International Women's Day, and there's such excitement about it, and there's such animation about it. And then I get told, baby, you need to implement LGBTI Day, Free and Equal Day across Middle Eastern Africa. And I go to all of my HR and I go to all of my businesses and I say, guys, we need to implement this. And suddenly I realized that when you talk about psychological safety and belonging, it's a more complex story than you think about initially, because in some of those countries and in some of those communities, it's actually illegal. So, and then we sit with this tension between, do we do what we want to do as a company? Do we push it through? Do we ask people to be courageous, or do we break the law? And this is where I start to see the courage that comes from standing with your belief and saying, we're going to do this globally. If you can't do it globally, we will give you the space not to do it. But if you choose to do it, we will support you. And so of 60 countries in Middle Eastern Africa, we had one factory in Turkey that not only took the courage to celebrate the day, but they invited people in, they invited external speakers, and it was amazing. And one of the things that I want to, why I'm highlighting this story is, when we talk about creating spaces of psychological safety, we need to recognize the tension that as companies we're managing. It's the tension between, how do I create a space of dignity and respect for the person who says I will not and I can't, and equally create dignity and respect for the person who is going for it? And how do you make both voices valid without prejudice? Then the last thing is the Paris Marathon. So Marcos, you were talking earlier about the surfing. I don't know if you know, but Schneider supports globally the Paris Marathon. And one of the things that we noticed is men and women are paid unequally when they go for races. And also, there's a lot of fanfare about when the man comes in at the end of the race, and all the cameras are there for when the man comes in at the end of the race. Nobody's ever there really for when the woman comes in, the first woman comes in, because the man comes in, the fanfare is done, and then you have a few people left, you know, to take the picture when the woman comes in. And we looked at this and we said we want to do something about this. And so we did two things. The first thing we did is men and women get the same amount. So if you come first or second or third, you get paid the same amount, which is a huge shift globally. The second is we worked with the Paris Marathon team, the city of Paris and all of that, to explain to them the hidden bias behind men and women not finishing the race at the same time, and the hidden bias behind women not having the opportunity to be celebrated. And they understood the case, thankfully. And so the times were changed so that somehow, even though men and women don't run in the same time, it's been synchronized in a way that there can be celebration, that people can feel that I'm not the second-class person. So I'm sharing all the stories. I started with JPT, you know, and my cynical colleague who said, "Tell me, will you still be engaged?" I am super engaged. I don't always like it, by the way, and it's not always perfect. But what I see is a story of courage that I've learned from personally in the 2.5 years that I've been there, to stand and say, what's not working? And how can we fix it? And how can we fix it in a very bold way? And that's why the sort of Schneider thing now is, what's your bold idea? What is the thing that is going to quickly get us? Because if you think about the world that we live in, it's about pace, it's about disruptive change, but doing it at pace. And so the idea is, what is the bold idea that's quickly going to get us the kind of change that we want to see? The last thing I want to talk about in the D&I space, which has impacted me personally, is the quality of empathy. And so a lot of the time we talk about the people who were excluded and now are being included, and we forget the impact of that on the people who were previously included, because there is an impact as well. And I remember talking to our global head of HR for one of the businesses, and he is, you know, I don't know, I guess he's in the age that you'd call white old male, you know, he's French, and he was talking about the fact that we need to reframe, and we need to create space also for that intelligence, and we need to create space also for that experience. How we do it, we need to be creative about. But the fact that we need to do it is important. And I'm sharing this because the final thing I want to say about Schneider and this story, it's not just a story of engagement for engagement's sake. It's a story of being courageous about tackling the hard things, and going at it even when you don't have all the answers, but going at it with sort of resilience and drive, and being adaptive and changing and flexible as things go. So this is the story that I'm really proud about. Hopefully it was interesting for you. It's not so easy when it's only you. You know, when it's 3 people, you can kind of bounce off each other. But when it's only you, you kind of think like, oh my God, I'm bored with my own voice already. So anyway, this is the story that I'd like to share, and I'm sharing it because I think that we can learn from it in South Africa, not just from the inclusion part, but the speed sometimes and the courage that it takes as leaders. Hopefully we are influencers or people who can influence, and just stepping in the space of saying, we're going to do this, and driving it, and then, you know, also being courageous to say, we're not going to do it prettily, we're not going to do it nicely, but we'll learn as we do it, but we're doing it anyway. This is the story of where we are at Schneider at the moment. Thank you. Yes?
Talking about people that were previously included and are excluded, have you got any advice as to how to address that? Because I have exactly the same thing in my organization. How do you actually, acknowledging it's one thing, but how do you then actually make it right and make everybody happy at the same time?
Great question. And so I'm going to start by saying I don't think that the intent is to make everyone happy. But what the conversation that we had with that senior HR president was, firstly, to recognize it is important and to recognize how people are feeling in that space and not to pretend that it's not important was the first thing. And then the second thing was to try and reframe what the quality of their contribution could be. And we're talking globally, by the way. This was not a South Africa conversation. This was a global conversation about the fact that if we want to see more women in the organization, if we want to see, Schneider's ambition is that we will be representative of the markets that we serve. So if we want to see racial and gender diversity, if we want to see age diversity, which is a big issue for us that I spoke about, then we have to reframe what value they bring, and we have to look for other opportunities for value adding. So there was a big conversation in that particular scenario about legacy, and how could we use some of that population in a legacy kind of role. So as supernumeraries, as coaches, as business coaches, not just personal coaches, as business coaches, as business development people, etc. So it was really about, and it is really about thinking creatively and differently about the value that population brings. Yeah, whatever that population is, by the way. Yeah, because another big one for us is we want to bring in more people from other industries. We want to bring in people from your digital, your tech industries. What does that mean for people who have grown up in energy and automation? And how do we think differently about the value that they bring? Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
Not really a question, but more reflection. I once worked under a chief executive at another big blue bank, who was hosting a conversation about diversity. And he said something very interesting because he was challenged very openly and very aggressively by somebody who was quite new on that exco around exactly this issue of, what up, dudes? I previously was, top of my proverbial future, and now all of a sudden I'm being sidelined. And he responded to say, diversity and embracing diversity in different ways, and it wasn't just the people conversation, is good business. And that doesn't mean that we have the same faces every year. That doesn't mean we have the same initiatives every year. But unfortunately, in a South African context particularly, in order to fix the previous imbalance, you have to create a new one.
Yes.
And it's not forever. And it doesn't mean that that imbalance will exist till the end of time. But everybody needs a chance to shine.
Yeah.
And you've had your chance to shine, and now you need to help everybody else shine.
Yeah.
And it was a really weird dynamic right at that second, because there was so much anger and so much testosterone. And he kind of looked back at this and went, I can help people shine. And it was about reframing his purpose in this diversity journey.
Yes.
And yes, okay, maybe I'm not the star on the stage anymore, but I'm building the star on the stage and helping that particular individual to reframe his own journey in building diversity, which ultimately is good business, was really what shifted the dial for that particular expo. It was a heart-wrenching thing to watch, but amazing to see how it shifted the mindset of individuals that previously were excluded or currently.
Thank you for that share, because it reminded me of two things. The first is that we always need to be mindful, and again, it's something that Liesl made, is structures and organizations were created for a specific purpose and for a specific people, even society, and we know this more than anything in South Africa. And when we talk about inclusion, it really is about recognizing that things are going to shift. It's recognizing that there will be displacement, replacement, sometimes misplacement, but hopefully not forever. The other reality is that, and I remember our global HR, chief HR saying this, is that in this journey, we're determined on this journey. We're determined to be the best company we can be. We're not going to apologize for that. And unfortunately, we might lose some people on the way. But if we can stand hand to heart and say that we've done it with empathy, we've done it with courage and integrity, then we'll be okay with that. And so we have seen where some really senior people have said, this is not for me. And it's created space, not in the way maybe you want to, but it has created space. Thank you. Yeah. Great. Okay. Thank you very much. Now I'm stepping into my other role. We're going to break for tea, and we will be back at 10:30? Yeah. So we'll be back here at 10:30 to start after tea. Thank you.